Over the course of these talks during this retreat, we have been inquiring into the nature and method of Sri Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry, or atma vichara. The point is to understand how to do self-inquiry in practice. And hence the point most surely is not simply to understand theoretical niceties. Tonight I wish to discuss with you the warrior spirit. The spirit that, by my lights, unlocks self-inquiry for the serious spiritual aspirant. Remember, the question, who am I, cannot ultimately go unanswered. All that is required is earnest resolve. The earnest resolve is identical with the warrior spirit. That constant, persistent, energetic, yet also humble assault on ignorance. That is to say, the warrior spirit is what allows one to be carried from knowledge of ignorance. I do not know myself, and I know that I do not know myself, to true knowledge of myself. That is to non-dual realization. All that is required for the answer to be us knowingly, or for us to be the answer awarely, is for there to be earnest resolve. There must be constant inquiry, and the question becomes a fireball, all consuming, all pervasive, all clear. Let us remember also that in the beginning was the existential opening. And the existential opening effectively bent the questions around, pointing those questions at the questioner. Basic questions then began to arise. What is all this about? Where is it all going? What is it that I'm doing here? How come everything? What am I doing with my life? How shall I live? And so on. All these basic questions are made possible by at least one existential opening. But here is the crux. The most essential, fundamental question is, who am I? all other basic questions arise therefrom and are dependent on who am I? For instance, how shall I live must invoke the more basic question, who am I? For how shall I live presupposes self-knowledge. I have to know something about myself in order to say something about how I should live. Simply put, all basic questions are like roads leading back to the fundamental question, who am I? And so it becomes very clear that Ramana Maharshi is doing nothing but allowing all of our inquiries to be funneled back into the essential, the one about my very nature. I would like to read something from perhaps one of the earliest texts by Ramana Maharshi. This one is rightly famously called Who Am I? And these questions are gathered by an early devotee named Shiva Prakasam Pillai. In this question and answer format, question 11 states, what is the means for constantly holding on to the thought, who am I? Let me repeat that. What is the means for constantly holding on to the thought, who am I? Maharshi answers, when other thoughts arise, one should not pursue them, but should inquire, to whom did they arise? It does not matter how many thoughts arise. As each thought arises, one should inquire with diligence, to whom has this thought arisen? The answer that would emerge would be to me. Thereupon, if one were to inquire, who am I? The mind would go back to its source, and the thought that arose will become quiescent. With repeated practice in this manner, the mind will develop the skill to stay in its source. So in fact, the longer version of self-inquiry consists of two parts, not simply one. In the first part, a thought arises, and we are invited to ask, to whom does this thought arise? The answer given is to me. And in the second part, we are to ask, who am I? And holding on to the question, we shall abide, or the mind shall abide in the source, or the big S self. The first part, though perhaps easily overlooked, is surprisingly helpful. It begins to set up how the overall inquiry will look. If I am to ask to whom is this thought arising, I must already be witnessing this thought. When I say to me, I'm effectively stating to witnessing awareness. Methodologically speaking, witnessing awareness, I am one level up, am one level higher than the arising thought. The more I take part in this first part of the investigation, the more I establish myself as witnessing awareness, the one to whom any thought whatsoever is arising. I'm learning, so to speak, to take the first step back or to perch one level up. Notice what I'm also learning. I'm learning that the thought must arise from some source. Here, the I thought. Any thought arises from the I thought. Do you see what I'm learning? We can't stop the inquiry here, and thus the crux is the second part. If this thought is arising to me, namely to witnessing awareness, then now it behooves me, mind, ego, I, to ask about its source, about my source. Who am I, therefore, as Maharshi says elsewhere, is really whence am I? That is, what is the source of witnessing awareness, or what is the source of the ego I? Hence, I'm learning to go one more step up. I go from thought to witness, and from witness to absolute source. In other words, and in concert with the discussion yesterday, I'm learning in this two-step process to turn back around and to go inward, to wheel around, as Plato nicely put it, and to return to the source. Naturally, and Maharshi says this elsewhere, we don't actually need to keep repeating the two-step process in practice. We can always ask who or who am I? And in some cases, we need to even ask who or who am I, because the flavor of the question is everywhere in the practice itself. Nonetheless, what should be underscored here is that we are learning introversion, not extroversion. We are learning that the introverted process is a process of returning to the source, is a process of going higher or farther back, as it were. We're learning that who am I is really what is the source of this arising I. Indeed, we are learning about the very beautiful, special method called self-inquiry, and about why it is so very simple, yet also immensely powerful and direct. All that is required, and Maharshi tips his hat in this direction, to continue self-inquiry is the warrior spirit, about which more soon. Can we elaborate further on this two-step process of self-inquiry? I think we can. Notice in actual practice that anytime a thought or a feeling arises, one of two things can be the case, provided that we, as it were, get lost in the thought or in the feeling. The first is that this thought asks and answers a different question, indeed, the wrong question. It could be answering the question, am I this? And the answer would be, I am, for example, a caretaker, or I am the knower, or I am the doer, or I am the feeler, and so on. That is not the question, who am I? It's already one level down. It is not only, as I say, a different question, it is also, and more importantly still, the wrong question. What can also happen is that who am I, the question can be posed, and a certain kind of bait and switch or subterfuge or habit can settle in, such that a sensation or a visual or auditory perception can be keenly attended to. It's a bait and switch because this is the wrong answer to who am I. So the question, who am I, is asked in all earnestness, and the answer is hearing birdsong, or I am the one who is hearing birdsong. This is the wrong answer. It is contingent, not essential. In fact, any personality trait, anything whatsoever that appears to be an answer, verbal, mental, or otherwise, is the wrong answer. So, we can ask, who am I? And mistakenly, we can repose the wrong question, which gives us the wrong answer, or we can ask, who am I? And through a kind of bait and switch, can come to the wrong answer. Get used to these mistakes and drop them. Then, who am I shall take on an air of immense freshness and mystery, since it will become experientially clear that all other kinds of questions and answers are either one level down or else patently mistaken, or both. The question is the most fundamental one. So much has been asserted, if not established. And because all the tried out answers are wrong, and because I want above all to know myself, there is a ramping up, a flavoring, a quivering, not to say also an immense appreciation that comes from simply being able to pose, who am I? To place it here, to be with it, to hold ourselves in this space. How do we hold ourselves in this space? We do so, as I have intimated, through cultivating the warrior spirit. Something in us must be constant, must be courageous, must be fortified, must be dogged. The literature be it Zen or Chan or Vedanta, keeps pointing us to the need for constant meditation, for constant one-pointed concentration. The question I read a few moments ago about constantly holding on to the thought, who am I, points in the same direction. Therefore, it won't be enough for us simply to ask the question in a nonchalant sort of way. Nor can we simply ask the question once or twice. We are encouraged to ask the question again and again and again and again, and each time to the very best of our ability with earnest resolve, with the deepest hunger to know ourself. All that is required for who am I to receive an answer is earnest resolve. That earnest resolve gives rise to supreme interest. And a supreme interest in the desire to know myself. This warrior spirit must be almost naive, innocent, unsophisticated, simple-minded. As Zen Master Bankei said, just be a blockhead. No more, no less. Be almost naive. Let this question not receive any intellectual sophisticated answers. Let it instead be placed and then rest in the air, quivering here, humbly open to it, indeed, in a sense, bow before it, and then in time, the question gets fastened, then glued, and ultimately nailed to the questioner. Questioner cannot answer the question, but can only pose it and open to the answer, which is precisely being the non-dual capital S self. How does all this look in practice? We have already followed this course. Initially, there appear to be many thoughts, many different kinds of thoughts, and thus, through great compassion, Ramana Maharshi tells us to do self-inquiry. So we ask, who am I, which is a thought, and this one thought increasingly becomes the central gravitational pull, the single thought. It's not perfect, but once we continue to ask, who am I, that single thought supplants the many dispersive thoughts. And in so doing, we arrive at one-pointed concentration, or one-pointedness. As we ask the question, we move from the outward going movements of mind, appearing as ego and world, to the inward going movements of mind, where it becomes possible for mind to be resolved into the capital S self. We are changing the course, changing our habit from going outward to turning inward, from going outward to turning inward, from going outward and being fascinated with objects of knowledge, to turning inward and not knowing what is most holy, most high, the source of it all, the source of the question. And we are also learning through the practice of self-inquiry to continue to seek the whence, or shall I say, to be open to the whence. Whence this thought? The source is witnessing awareness, the relative source. Whence witnessing awareness? The source of it all. And above all, we are learning to, in practice, hold on to the who. Hold on to, be with, who am I? Without seeking an object of knowledge. This much has been rolled out many times during our discussions. Without waiting for something to happen, for the big S self is timeless. Without expecting, for that implies duality. This holding, who am I, is a holding open, and thus we return to the warrior spirit. The warrior spirit has that strength to hold on to one pointed concentration on who, or who am I. It feels like a steadying, a staying put, partially relaxed, and partially, if we're in nirvikalpa samadhi, effortful, or a bit effortful. We are perched while quivering. We are humbly open while slightly proactively being at the edge of our seats. It is a very awkward, though immensely interesting position to be in. Awkward because all we can humbly do is hold on to who am I without knowing who we are. Yet immensely interesting because the very breath of divine truth is already being hinted at. The wonderful perfume of the spirit of the big S self can already be smelled. After all, the warrior spirit, as I have called it today, is in the service of knowledge. The knowledge of the truth of reality. The knowledge that truly sets us free from the ignorance that apparently has enclosed us for so long. May the warrior in us continue until the matter is fully and finally resolved.